First, thank you everyone for taking part in this online conference and for everyone to join this discussion. So our idea was that all these topics that are circulating around chats and like our ComCom calls, sometimes there are like some main topics that never get time to be actually discussed. So we thought like, okay, let's use like 1 hour of our time and make this as a public discussion where all the people who are usually active in the community can join, but also others who are just sometimes listening from the side can also give their input. So our idea was to talk about 3 topics. First one is related feeds. So how do feeds relate to the Hypercore as a underlying infrastructure? Then interoperability between the projects in the data ecosystem and the gaps between different environments like browser, command line tools, Electron app, and so on. So Franz will now tell us a little bit of introduction about like what are hypercores and how which different structures even exist currently. And then we can jump into different topics and make this as an open discussion. You want to go on?
Yeah, hi. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction of where, according to from my perspective, we have where the points lie, where we could add more interoperability between the different projects in the stack. Let me just give 1 second. Yeah, so I see 3 topics, possible topics that we can talk about that I will just give a little intro to. One is interoperability. That can mean different things I will talk about in the second. The second one is to talk a bit about related feeds. So most apps that we use these days don't deal with a single Hypercore feed, but with many of them, and how they relate to each other is there's different approaches. And a third one that also is in this whole section of things is if there's ways to have the same code for Node, Electron, and the browser, right? That's something that Marv will talk about, I think, later today or tomorrow, a lot likely with his DatDot SDK that he's working on. But there's also some like maybe general points to that can be discussed here. And of course, just chime in very soon with other topics as well. So interoperability. There's 2 ways to talk about this. One is interoperability on the network level. There we have the great thing that we all are using Hypercore protocol, which basically, if all apps are using it, all different apps, they are already interoperable on a networking level. So they can find each other and they can exchange messages, right? I think by now pretty much all apps in our community are using Hyperswarm and the most recent Hypercore protocol, or are in the process of moving to these modules. Another way to look at interoperability, though, is how different apps, like for example Beaker, the peer-to-peer browser that Paul is working on, and Cabal, the chat app that a few people in here are working on, could like exchange actual data when they run on the same machine. Right now, they have different storages and different networking sockets that they open and use. And so the only way at the moment for them to communicate would be over the peer-to-peer network, which might work actually, but seems like quite a waste of resources to have 2 apps on your computer store things 2 times and so on. So this is one thing that we can talk about. The other one is related feeds. And there's currently in the community, there's 2 prominent approaches of how different projects handle many feeds. The one approach is what Hyperdrive uses. And the other one is what Multifeed and Kappa Core apps mostly use at the moment. I have a little picture here. I just did it right before the talk, so please bear with me. So I'll just quickly explain how these 2 approaches work, because I think it's important to know for others also to follow the later discussion maybe. In a Hyperdrive, you have one key to share at first. Oh, you don't see my mouse. I'm at the 7B32 feed that is the left hyperdrive feed. So if people exchange this key, they find this feed on the network. And then by definition, by convention, the first message in this feed, the first block, always is a header block that has there's actually a standard for this, how this is encoded, and it contains a type string, which at the moment for hyperdrives is hypertry, and it contains a metadata field that contains another key to a hypercore, which is the content hypercore where the actual data is shared. And as soon as the peer opens this feed, it will read the first message, read the address of the content key, and then, because now both parties know the key, they can start exchanging this feed as well. And Hyperdrive by now can have mounts. They can have references to other hyperdrives. This is at the top left, the stat and mount field. And this again contains keys to more feeds, and then you can start to sync them. So from one root feed, you kind of traverse the feeds to more feeds that you then start to share. But it all starts with one feed that is only writable by a single party, right? All hypercores are only writable by a single party, and then you spread it from there. Another way to deal with many feeds is the multi-feed model. In the multi-feed model, you don't start with a shared feed, but you just start with a shared key. So this 1CD3 key here isn't an actual hypercore. So at the moment in multi-feed, when you open the connection, you open a hypercore protocol connection, but there's no actual feed behind this primary channel. But what you do then is that you use protocol extensions, which is a feature of Hypercore protocol, to exchange feed keys that are related to that topic. So Cabal, the chat app that uses multi-feed in Kappa Core, Cabal, when you join a Cabal, you join this shared key in orange here, and then you just send to all peers that you're connected to, you send your own actual feed with the messages in them and the feeds that you know about, and this goes on and on and on, and so everyone can meet on this shared key. So this is the two approaches that kind of emerged historically in the past years to deal with different hypercores. Now, if we have a look at how different projects at the moment make use of that, we see a wild mixture of these approaches actually. So Beaker, the browser, is based on Corestores and hyperdrives. Cabal, the chat app, is based on multi-feeds and Kappa Core. Maybe a quick sentence on what Kappa Core is. I didn't come to that. Kappa Core is a layer that traditionally sits upon the multi-feed module. And what it does is it takes all the feeds that are in a multi-feed, so that are related to a topic, traverses all of them, parses all the messages, and then allows you to create secondary indexes from all these messages. So you'd go through all the messages and, for example, in the Cabal case, sort them by timestamp, or sort them into different buckets by channel, by chat channel. And then, like the actual app would access these views, do queries on them to like give you a combined view of all the feeds in a multi-feed. So Cabal uses multi-feed and Kappa. Corestore, by the way, I think the people who've been here earlier, is like the underlying module that combines the different feeds used by Hyperdrive. And when you replicate Corestores, you basically replicate all feeds that the other party already knows about from one of the primary Hyperdrive keys from which you can access the other ones. Now Cobox, another project in our community. Cobox is doing a multi-writer Hyperdrive thing on top of Corestore and Kappa Core and Multifeed. How this is possible, I can say in a second. Basically, there's a few PRs and experimental modules out there that I and others have been working on that try to bring all this together. So what Cobox is doing, they are using a Corestore so that they can use hyperdrives on top in a regular way. And then it uses an experimental module called Corestore Multifeed that adds multifeed replication on top of the Corestore. And then it uses Kappa Core to index the feeds to have the multi-writer thing that they are doing on top. Sonar, a project I'm working on, it's a peer-to-peer based peer-to-peer database and search engine, is again using Corestore, but at the moment we're not using multifeed, we're just using Kappa Core directly on top of Corestore. So here are some links. I can also put the slides in the chat later, how these things are coming somehow together at the moment, but it's all still very experimental, unmerged PRs, and many people, me included, not sure if we settled for the exact right approaches in between all this. Yeah, same machine interrupt, just a very quick last words to that before we come to the discussion. One thing that would make that much easier is if different apps would use a shared storage and networking daemon, right? So if Cabal and Beaker and Sonar would all talk to one single daemon running on one computer, they could reuse their networking and storage resources. So if I would open a Cabal feed in Sonar, for example, which is not possible at the moment, but might be nice to have a full text search engine and database abstraction over Cabal feeds, right? Then at the moment, I would have to duplicate the storage because Cabal has its storage, Sonar has its storage. They can communicate on the networking level soon, hopefully. But they would have different storages. So one thing that could be interesting is to talk about if this new Hyperspace daemon could be this shared storage daemon for different apps. At the moment, there's still some features missing for this daemon to be usable with Kappa Core style apps, but that's likely something that can be quite easily added to the daemon. So what else do I have? Just give me a quick second. Yeah. This I already talked about, identifying and exchanging feeds, how to deal with hypercores in a generic way. We have the standard of encoding the first block of a feed in a specific way so that you can have a type string, but this still doesn't allow to have a shared approach at the moment of how related feeds are found. So there's Multifeed, which uses this extension protocol. There's Hypercore, which uses the second field in the first block of a feed to reference another feed, and there's different approaches. So this was my quick intro. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. I was just trying to maybe sketch some points and give a shared surface for the discussion, also for people who are not in here super long. Please now, I will get back to Nina, who will, I think, introduce the discussion, and then, yeah, let's talk about how we can make all our apps work together and create something great out of all of them together, maybe.
Yay, thanks, Frondo. I mean, we're completely freestyling here, so basically now we have to make this a discussion, and we are all online. So, I mean, the idea was that maybe there could be like somebody who has some idea already about the certain topic. So, as we said, there are 3 topics: interoperability, related feeds, and different environments. So somehow Alex was already researching the related feeds part. So maybe you can like lead this part of the discussion. Frondo said he would be interested in the interoperability part, and we need one volunteer for the different environments. So we were like thinking maybe a Rat who is working on the mobile part of integrating that in the mobile phones, or maybe Mauve, who has experiences with the SDK, so with the browser, and now also with the Electron, or maybe Phrasey. I don't know. I mean, if somebody wants to take a lead on that part of the discussion, that would be lovely. So now, Alex can maybe give some thoughts about these related feeds.
Right. I think the most important part is that we kind of discuss. Many things were already nicely summarized by Frondo. I think the main idea is that, or let's say in terms of use cases, one general use case would be a hosting solution or some kind of a way of generically keeping data online. But if all you have in the beginning is an address, like a hyper address, then what are all the related feeds? That depends on whether you are dealing with a Hyperdrive or maybe with a Cabal chat or many others. Another use case could be if somebody wants to build something similar or in spirit of SSB, to have some mechanism where you have friends and friends automatically keep your data online, but depending on what kind of data your friends would have, you have to have a way of, from one address, maybe slowly traversing them. And another one would be, what if in a Cabal chat or an assistant that uses it, somebody would start posting certain messages that have a special meaning, or just generally in a message sharing a link to maybe a Hyperdrive, maybe something else. Another one would be if we have ever some kind of DNS-like, or like any system where you would have key rotation, and you want to revoke, like if I have a hyperdrive and I mount another hyperdrive, nobody is stopped from mounting my secondary hyperdrive in their data structure. And if somebody discovers my hyperdrive based on that, they might not know my primary hyperdrive. So if I change my mount, that's maybe not known to them. So maybe instead of just having a mount that links from a hyperdrive to maybe another hyperdrive, what if I can if I learn about that secondary hyperdrive first, can I discover the primary one? So there's a lot of use cases and structures where it would be cool to figure out what are all the related feeds, and then maybe in the terms of in the context of mounts, you might not follow all of them automatically. That might be like an endless traversal, or maybe you do want to follow them automatically, or maybe you need some kind of moderation system where you would even not say I always follow these kind of links and not those, but maybe this depends on some kind of moderation feature. And as we have seen, a lot of those different projects already find different solutions, and maybe they have similar use cases. So if we standardize the possible, if we think this from a way of like, in which way can we link? Is there some moderation? And what are all the ways? Then we can standardize them. So if any kind of data structure or project needs it, they can already use an existing standard instead of reinventing the wheel again, because that makes not only generic hosting solutions, but anyone who wants to maybe do this SSB-inspired friend-to-friend mechanism harder, because you would need to support every single project individually instead of relying on a mechanism that everyone follows. But yeah, that depends really that people in the specific projects engage themselves. It's hard to solve.
Okay, I'm going to roll back into the frame. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Like, first of all, maybe the projects that already use these mechanisms, do you feel like sharing why did you decide to use this? Or does this even make sense to know? Or how possible is it even to change to something else? Is there a need to change? Are we trying to figure out the standards for newly created data types so that we can kind of align our projects? Frondo, do you have any thoughts, or
maybe so there is an existing, let's say, draft, or more like a discussion in context of a draft for related feeds proposal. I can share links to 3 comments where each comment basically references the previous comment, and those summarize the approach. And the general idea is that there are already existing mechanisms, like Hyperdrive will not change. I also probably imagine that Cabal will keep their mechanisms. So there might be a way to combine multiple mechanisms and have every software that wants to follow the standard check maybe first if it's a Hyperdrive. If not, check if it's using the mechanism that, for example, Cabal is using, or Kappa Multifeed. And if that's not the case, then maybe a third one that covers all the remaining use cases, so that we kind of also work with what already exists, but maybe add on top and make that a standard that everyone can link to. And then other projects can either use one of the existing approaches or go maybe with a third standard that covers maybe if there's some certain use cases missing. And I can share the links in the chat.
Do you, Frondo, have any thoughts on this, or do you want to add something, or anyone else? I mean, you can just, I don't know, how would we make it? Do you say in the chat, I want to talk, and then?
Yeah, I'd open the discussion now. If like someone in here has some thoughts or ideas to share, please just unmute your microphone and start talking, or give a ping in the chat. I think I'll wait like 30 seconds of silence if no one wants to start talking, for people to think about these things a little bit. Or also, if you don't like, if you have questions, we please just ask along with questions also how we should maybe talk about these things. If no one wants to talk, I can give some more thoughts on these things, but I'd really like to try to make it more interactive here. Let's just wait a sec. Yeah, Marv already says I'm down, so Please, Marv, unmute your microphone and talk along.
I think that was a little bit
your-
related to this other discussion about the different.
Also, yeah, okay.
But if you have any thoughts on this, Marv, please feel free to join the discussion.
Also, Kira is writing in the chat, so also Kira, Marv or Kira, if you want to say something, just unmute your microphones and talk along. We'll just wait a little bit and people can think about questions during that.
Yeah, Frondo, you were mentioning yesterday about this Multifeed Corestore compatibility, right?
Oh yeah, so there's two things being involved there. One is that at the moment, this multi-feed protocol extension that exchanges the feed is at the moment mounted on the full protocol stream and not on an individual channel. So the Hypercore protocol supports two ways to use these extensions, either on a channel that is bound to a key, or on the full stream that is like the full connection to the peer. And currently it's using the full connection, but there's an open PR that would move that to a channel, which basically doesn't change anything in the way multi-feed can work. It's a protocol level change, but it doesn't change anything functionality wise. And that would allow it to use the multi-feed replication model on top of a Corestore based storage, which makes it really easy to combine it with hyperdrives. There's a very experimental module. I think I linked it in here. Let me find down here, that github.com/Frondo/multifeed is a fork of multifeed that uses the PR in the link above, and then basically just removes the whole storage part of multifeed and replaces that with Corestore. And that's already what, and Cobox already is using that at the moment, even though it's quite experimental. If someone wants to, please just unmute your microphone and start talking. If several people talk, we'll handle the moderation. It'd be great to have some more voices in here, I think, and not just talk between the three of us. So please just unmute your microphone. Marv, Marv.
Hey friends, I'm Move.
Hi.
I think I have some opinions on this stuff, and even a while ago we were talking about getting Corestore integrated into multi-feed. And honestly, it's really nice seeing this, because one kind of pain I've run into trying to get Hypercore working on the web and stuff working with Dat SDK is that people would have protocol incompatibilities, especially in the Kappa ecosystem. So like, for instance, I had a gateway for, even before we had all of these noise updates and all of the new protocol stuff, I had a WebSocket gateway in the Dat Gateway project, which would replicate Hypercores over WebSockets. And when I made that, I was like, okay, this is great. We're going to be able to port Cabal and everything else. And sadly, it didn't work because Multifeed and the Cabal ecosystem had their own wire protocol. And it was kind of hard when apps building on top of it had incompatible wire protocols. So it's really cool seeing this Corestore stuff, because in my opinion, Corestore is a lot less opinionated than Multifeed was, though lately there is a bit more to it with like key derivation and now the extension messages being at the Corestore networker level. But it seemed like a pretty good place to standardize just like, what does our wire protocol look like? How do we actually exchange data with other peers? So it's nice seeing that getting into multi-feed, because from there we can kind of have a place to build on, and that'll empower stuff like DatDot, where we now wouldn't have to worry as much about the specific data structure or the specific app being used, and can kind of rely like, okay, it's going to be some number of hypercores, and then now we can think more about how do we get those hypercore keys in the application. And if we're replicating in DatDot, how do we get those hypercore keys to the actual DatDot services. So yeah.
Thanks, Mo. So maybe that is kind of a cool segue for.
I don't know, like what I would wish for, I don't know if that's something that could be possible, is that like I heard like a bunch of new information that I wasn't aware of. And I mean, in the past we had the DEPs, now I think we have the HYPs, some kind of standardization proposals where we can capture those things. So whether that starts in an issue, a repository, or just in HackMD, if we could kind of find a place to gather this and where everybody maybe can continue to discuss and follow, that would be great. I can just say also on the side for the project that we are working on, which is DatDot, it was mentioned already. That's just one of the possible projects. I think there will probably be many in the future where we urgently need a way to work with data that maybe represents actually Cabal chats, but maybe also will be just hyperdrives, or maybe it will be maybe we work with Cobox stuff, and so in a way it's quite urgent for us, and it's getting more urgent all the time. So we like having again like a new place where we will discuss it. Maybe we'll just continue on that issue that I linked earlier in the chat for related feeds. But if there could be a new place to gather all these the progress and the modules that are trying to, like, let's say, push the boundaries, that would be a good first step. I would recommend the issue, but anything would be great.
I mean, one thing what would be interesting is to hear if there is anyone who is already who had to solve this issue. I don't know, Mov, you now built the Aggregor browser, and probably when people paste in a link, I mean, like the address, dot address, as we used to call it, how do you resolve it? How do you know if it's a dot, or if it's a hyper, or if it's a Hypercore, or Hyperdrive, or Hyperdrive, or Multifeed? How do you resolve this? Do you just check the URL extension and then just assume that it's Hyperdrive, or yeah?
Yeah, so I haven't gotten to supporting non-hyperdrives yet. I have had some thoughts about how that could work. The main thing that's kind of useful now with Corestore and its reuse of Hypercores internally is that I could load whatever URL you pass me as a Hypercore, and then look at its header and be like, okay, what type it is. And then if it's a Hyperdrive, I can load a Hyperdrive with the same Corestore, and it'll just reuse that core instead of having weird conflicts. But currently, I am only focusing on Hyperdrives in like this month level near future. But I was thinking that for Hypercores, at least, we could have something where we could detect if it is not a hyperdrive and then change the URL to like reference blocks. So for instance, I'm going to type in the chat right now. We could use hyper/key, like whatever the key is for the hypercore, and then instead of referencing a file path, we can reference, say, just an index in the hypercore. And then similarly, if it's a hypertry, and we know it's a hypertry, we can use the path to the actual block in the hypertry, and then return, return the buffer at that point, or have like one thing I'm experimenting with right now in Aggregor is how do I use URLs for actually writing data on the Hypercore protocol. And so there's a thing I proposed a while ago in the .webxt repo. And so this was kind of trying to think like, what does it mean to post to a hyper URL? How do we write to a hyper URL? And how do we make that work with hypercores? So there's a little bit of text at the bottom there for hypercore where maybe we could check if a key is a hypercore, and then we can use posts to write data to it, or get metadata from the HTTP response headers. So we can tell whether something is a hypercore or hyperdrive from the header, but as for what that means for the rest of the URL, that's still kind of up in the air. With regards to seeding, so far I've just got Dat Store, which is based on the old standard that Paul put together for Hashbase. So there's a DEP for that called like Dat Pinning Services or something. And that currently works with Hyperdrive or like Dat URLs. I was thinking of adding some sort of Hypercore support in Dat Store, so that I could seed hypercores. But kind of the main question there is, again, how do we deal with groups of hypercores? Because like a single hypercore, it's pretty obvious. You take the discovery key and then you just start loading it. But for groups of hypercores, how do we map which hypercore keys go to which discovery key? Yeah, so that's kind of some of the tough stuff. I think we were talking about this in DatDot, actually. And I think we were talking about just having the discovery key explicitly mentioned. Like, hey, here's a list of hypercore keys that we want to back up, and then here's the discovery key. And I think that that's something that could make life easy for us in the short term for pinning services. But that's not very automatic, and it'd require buy-in from the people actually using the pinning services.
Maybe I have one observation. Like, I think, I mean, I'm not saying the community is small, but like the projects that are kind of the most prominent, maybe, like we kind of know each other for like a long time, and still every project, basically every app, you could almost say, somehow made their own changes, or there has like a little custom way of doing things. So from observing this, I feel if people start using the Hypercore protocol to build all kinds of apps, and just doing it without even joining maybe any kind of channels or community forums or anything, they just do it. I feel it's very likely that depending on their needs, they will also maybe have multiple feeds and relate them, and they just do it the way they want, because that's what's already happening. So I think we will get per app, we will have a different structure. So what you just mentioned, more for you support the hyperdrives, and maybe we could support more. It feels like, yeah, we can maybe identify the hypercore, or what kind of data structure we're dealing with. Is it a hyperdrive? Is it something else? But for pinning services, or for maybe some SSP-like system where I want to just help people keep data online, if every app kind of does it in their own way, which seems to be likely, it's very hard, because every project that wants to pin or do it in a more generic way needs to support all these projects individually if we don't have some sorts of agreement. Maybe I can just, for those who don't know, the proposal that I linked, so would kind of say we would have the header message and check it if we're dealing with a hyperdrive, given a hyper address, and then we just use the way Hyperdrive does it. Otherwise, we would also check the extension messages and figure maybe out if it's maybe a Cabal chat or some kind of Kappa multifeed data structure. And for now, the proposal would be that if it's neither of them, and they maybe have a priority order, we always, so if, for example, a data structure would be structured like a hyperdrive, but on top of it would also emit extension messages like Cabal would do it, maybe to associate like a chat room with a repository, then maybe what would, and if they basically say different things of what are the associated feeds, then maybe there needs to be one that would be prioritized. I don't know. But otherwise, maybe there could be also a field in the header to tell that there is a certain manifest feed, and that would just be a generic. It might work similar to mounts, but maybe it's not. The meaning is not a mount, but there can be different meanings. Do you follow the link automatically or not? Is there some moderation feature? But technically, just a feed that lists all the related feeds. How they relate and how do you interpret the data from those related feeds, that's kind of up to the individual app or data structure, but at least you would have a generic manifest feed, or like however it's called, that lists all the feeds, and then it depends on the kind of app, what you do with the data. But at least if you are running a generic pinning service, you get to them. It's maybe a little bit slower because you have to first look up the first address, then figure out the manifest feed, and then maybe it takes a bunch of more round trips. But that's why if you already know what kind of data structure you're dealing with, you maybe use some shortcuts that are custom. But on top of it, you also have the manifest feed that you can use if you just want this generic pinning service or some kind of SSB-like structure where you automatically fetch data from your friends and keep it around, even if you don't know what kind of data they're actually using or what apps.
Okay, because we have like just 1 hour for to cover all these 3 topics, I would really like to thank you, Alex and Mauve, and everyone who contributed to the discussion. Just maybe to wrap it up, any suggestions or any
Sorry to intervene. Red just offered to talk a bit about Gateway's current approach.
Cool.
And I think we still have time, so it would be great to hear you if you're still up for that, Red.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know that it's related to this. So.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, excellent. Hello, everyone. Long-time lurker, first-time caller. I actually I've been keeping up with some of the discussions about how to resolve this challenge of making everything more interoperable in the ecosystem. And as someone who is very new, I've been mainly trying to make sure that what I'm doing with Gateway is as unopinionated as possible on the higher level. That way, as the lower level solutions can arise, it can kind of not have this proprietary or sort of customized thing that's imposing itself. So internally in the application, everything is kind of like, for example, like URL interpretation is based off of a registry in the application. So it's just with like parameters like how does it interpret the scheme and so on and so forth. And it's just kind of the goal, I guess, is to have a external API available that would hopefully allow for, if there as lower level solutions are being made, this can hopefully learn how to handle things that aren't yet compatible with each other. But I guess I just wanted to come on and express that I'm ready to do whatever would be preferable from the community. I'm happy to experiment and be as accommodating as possible. Right now, I'm still wrapping my head around, how. Oh, is there a link? Oh, thank you, Mo, for sharing the link. But yeah, so I'm still. Oh, sorry.
Can I just ask you something, Red?
Yes, absolutely.
API meant as like some kind of a resolver that then any project could use, and it would be always up to date with all these new data structures that would pop up in this sense?
Yes. So right now, I'm just working within the Gateway project, but I definitely want to separate that out so that it can be used in other projects that are operating in a node environment, for example. But yes, this is something that I would like to not be kind of confined to just Gateway. And I know that me and Mauve actually have been we were talking about, like, for example, with dat fetch, how to come up with a more generalized way of querying data from these different protocols and posting as well. But anyway, hopefully that was sufficient or helpful. But happy to talk about anything.
Sounds super cool.
Yeah, sounds super interesting, especially the dat fetch. I imagine it's probably something like a curl for dat.
Mov just shared the link. Right. That's awesome.
But yeah, exactly. I think also here, depending, because if you get an address, you don't know what's behind that. And I feel either the dat fetch would need to have a lot of code to understand all these kind of different data structures, or a registry, and then it always has to ask the registry. Or ideally, we come up with some kind of generic standard where you have some parts that are custom to the app, but at least if you don't know, you have a generic way of pulling all the feeds that you need. So then we can maybe we don't need the registry, and we don't need, or also not like command line tools or anything that has a lot of knowledge about all kinds of individual future data structures.
Okay, I suggest that we really now wrap it up. Do you think that this is now the right time?
That also is kind of wrap up question. That I'd like to take one question from the chat that Jeremy asked. Without more up-to-date background, I'm sort of struggling to see the contextual goal of interop across arbitrary hyper apps. How different do two contexts need to be before interop becomes irrelevant? Is the goal here for any given hyper app to understand, parse the data model of any other? And I think that's a very interesting question and an important one. Like, why are we talking about interop? And I think there's two perspectives. One is like actual user interoperability. That, of course, doesn't make sense for all of our apps. But for some, I can very much imagine, like a few years from now, if we continue to work on all this, that it could be very great to have them interoperable. Like, for example, Cabal as a chat app and Cobox as a multi-writer shared drive app. Seeing them combined in a shared user interface, for example, makes much sense to me. And also other connections where you like reuse, for example, in Cabal, you already have like you can encode trust models, right? We'll see the demo, I think, very soon. And reusing that social information that you manage in there for other apps, and like maybe using it to bootstrap other apps that run on top, like, for example, a music exchange app using the Sonar database layer, for example, or something like that, I think is very interesting. And of course, this becomes much easier if there's shared foundations that make that straightforward, which it's not really at the moment. The other perspective actually relates quite to that. Even if we say we don't really care about merging apps or having combined user interfaces or stuff like that, which is a very valid perspective to just develop, for example, Cabal with all the features that you would need in a chat app. There's still the level, of course, of as if we manage to find shared abstractions that are benefitable to all of these apps, we have a larger portion of shared code, which, of course, if it works well with the maintainership and everything, means less work for all of us, because bugs fixed are bugs fixed for all of the apps and so on. So this is the other perspective. If we have shared foundations and if we maintain them together, which of course then needs some structure on how this is handled, and this is of course also a very much ongoing discussion in the DAT consortium and around how we want to maintain our shared foundations. But if we manage to do that, and then we can, I think, all profit from a very reliable shared networking and storage stack, and then experimenting with different approaches also to feed management on top of that. Yeah.
Maybe just one more question to everyone. Like, where do we do these discussions? Because one thing is a Hypercore protocol, which is an underlying technology on which most of the things are built. but I don't know, do people from the Hypercore team have any thoughts? Like, should this discussion about the interoperability happen there in the Discord chat or your repo, or should it happen in the old DAT repo, or where could people follow, and like where can we share even like different modules that we could be reusing like this from the DAT fetch and the gateway? We're kind of solving the same problem, but how do we find each other so that we don't repeat the same kind of solutions? So Mov says that I think we'll need project buy-in as a start. Aha.
I could just say what I mean out loud. Basically, I think that, we can have a repo and be like, hey, we're making a standard, but if no one is actually using it, then it's not super useful. So I think it'd be nice to like reach out to the maintainers of projects and like be like, hey, let's make something. Because like, some of the major projects in the ecosystem that deal with data are probably like Sonar and Cabal and DatDot, and then, the Hyperspace stuff. And then if we can get,
I just can say from my perspective, or I guess from our perspective, when it comes to DatDot, if there was such a repo or a standards discussion, we would definitely support it. I mean, so we can buy into that, and I hope others would too, because yeah, then it becomes useful.
CBLGH also shared a link from Substack. So obviously Substack was also kind of like tinkering around this already. I don't know the details, so if anyone knows anything about that, maybe CBLGH, do you want to share what is there? Substack cannot join this tool, so he's watching us, I guess, on YouTube. No?
I'd maybe just add one thing, that actually I think quite a lot of this is already ongoing in a way, and it just takes a lot of time at times, because most of these projects are volunteer run or have like goals. If they have grants or something, interoperability usually isn't one of the goals that they like work towards with the money. For example, all these experimental PRs that, for example, Cobox is using and that we are using with Sonar, I think quite a few things are in there already. So it's really, one point is, as long as there is no immediate need for interoperability, I think it just takes time to adapt shared approaches. But I also think this is ongoing in parts already, and we should just keep up the discussion, and I think we have the forums for it. Like, maybe we need another channel somewhere or so, but the forums are basically there, and as Mov said, the main thing will be to talk it through from the perspective of each project that might change something for more interoperability. Yeah.
I mean, one thing is also for existing projects to change something or not, but another thing is to make like some kind of inspiration for everyone who is just starting a project, to maybe kind of like agree on something, some standard, so that they don't now create again another incompatible structure.
Right. Personally, what I also imagine is that the project that exists right now, honestly, if we would support all their individual proposals, that's even manageable, I think. I mean, there's still a little bit of overhead, but if from now on, hopefully, many more people will start using Hypercore and building things on top of it or on top of Hyperdrive, then if they have, for certain problems that they're facing, like a standard recommended approach, then at least we don't need to start supporting more and more different projects, but only the ones that exist now, plus the new ones will then hopefully use one of the standards. So that's the outcome in the end. That would be already great.
So what is that data transfer project? Does anybody know? I don't know it. Jeremy, do you want to share like some ideas, like core ideas from there, if you have a mic? Okay, no pressure. I saw before a question also. I don't know if this is now too much of a jump. It's a way to transfer data between major social media platforms. Oh, Interesting. Okay, so basically they probably also use some kind of resolver to know like what is the data type and then kind of...
Yeah, but I think we also need to make it very custom to Hypercore and the way the ecosystem is structured. So maybe it's an inspiration, but...
Yeah. Adapters. Oh, lovely, Java. What about the somebody was asking something with the comparison with libp2p? Anyone having any information on that?
I could say a few quick words on that, even though I'm no expert on libp2p. But we did like, I had at least one call with someone from libp2p to talk a bit about compatibility. So the networking stack, which is the thing that libp2p mostly cares about, of Hypercore protocol, basically could be somehow integrated into libp2p. Oh, there's going to be a talk on IPLD later. That's very cool. I didn't really notice that. So yeah, it could be integrated, but also the layering is quite a bit different. So it's not without hurdles, and it could be really interesting to gain some of the newer developments of libp2p. Like for example, I think there's a Bluetooth implementation so that you can exchange data over Bluetooth. For these additional transports, it could be really interesting. But I don't think anyone so far tried to do that. And as I said, the layering is a little different, so it's not super straightforward to adapt. So yeah.
Do you want to loudly add something, or do you just want to continue quietly listening? Or any thoughts on any of these topics that we mentioned? Don't be shy.
No, it's also, of course, fine. Just unmute your microphone if you want to still talk. Ah, okay, he's coming. Cool. Audio, he's saying. I think you should be able to talk. I can also... No, you're already unlocked. Everyone is unlocked. So yeah, we have a few minutes left, not much. So I think if Paul manages to enable his audio, just...
Okay,
there he is.
Sorry about that, everybody. It's even more ridiculous because I don't actually have that much to contribute here. I just wanted to mention that everybody's been, I think, right on track. The conversation makes a lot of sense, and Beaker's in a similar place to like what Ranger's Aggregor and Gateway are in, where it's currently just sort of assuming everything is a hyper moment. But I know that we've been, expecting to tackle this sometime in the not too distant future, and I want to plus one what Frondo was saying, that it's something that like I think we'll eventually get this hashed out. So I'm not concerned that this conversation is going to get dropped off or anything like that. And that's basically all I have to say. It's just, listening along and plus one to everything.
Cool.
I think one interesting thing that will come sooner or later is that there's a way in Beaker to use Hypercores directly without Hyperdrives, and that then of course will also open the doors to kind of merge things more and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, that kind of connects to that question about what the goal of the interoperability is, and one of the definite ones is that Beaker would be able to run these other applications, which it traditionally has not been able to do.
Yeah.
Oh, Frondo, do we still have time to mention Hyperspace? Yesterday when we were preparing a little bit for this, you were mentioning that this could be or... Yeah,
I think that's part of the exploration that I think the different projects will make by themselves, or that is happening. I think, at least from my perspective from Sonar, I can say that we are investigating this because, like, one thing is that basically if in your project you start to use the Hyperspace daemon, and if it works out for you, you can actually skip quite some responsibility in a way, of course, depending on Hyperspace becoming less experimental and becoming properly maintained and everything. But then having like not having to care about the actual replication and networking logic quite reduces the surface that you have to deal with it, which is great, especially for smaller projects, I think. And There's not much missing to run Kappa Core on top of Hyperspace, like as a client to the Hyperspace server. Right now, there's some events missing, so you're not notified at the moment if a download of a block is completed, which would be needed to index all the blocks. And there's likely some things that need to be made more efficient in a way, like maybe exchanging bit fields for feeds, which blocks are downloaded. But I think that's all things that can be solved with only very little changes, like maybe a few more methods on the Hyperspace daemon. And then that's an interesting perspective. Like it has extension support, so it should be able, should be possible to run multi-feed models on top of the Hyperspace daemon. Yeah, so I think that's something that will be interesting to explore. Another question, of course, that is something that needs to be thought out there is if different projects want to run the daemon, or if there's updates and then there's incompatibilities, and like Beaker, you have the most recent Beaker, it needs the most recent Hyperspace daemon, and then you want to run, I don't know, Sonar if it runs on Hyperspace and it's an older version, and then it could be incompatible. So there's some packaging and so on story that needs to be fetched out, and things better be quite stable, otherwise it will be difficult. Daemon conflicts, Paul says in the chat. Yeah, exactly. So it's not super easy, but also hopefully we can solve it, because I think a shared daemon for all this stuff could be great.
Also, maybe a question, because exactly we in our project will be very likely to run a daemon, and we will probably need to have some kind of proxy that then makes it available through WebSockets, but otherwise we very much need it. I was just wondering, because I didn't go into the details of Hyperspace yet, but maybe Andrew or somebody knows.
Yeah, Andrew wanted to join, so
right.
Maybe you can.
So if I would ask for an address, I would probably, like, let's say the example of a Hyperdrive. I would ask for the meta feed, and then maybe I need to manually understand that there's like a content feed, and then ask also for the content feed. But if I'm not aware, I would not by default probably get it. Or would there be a way, or some kind of idea maybe for the long-term future, that it can give me some more daemons, or tell me which, addresses, and tell me which other hypercores I might need or maybe would be interested in?
So currently that's the case, exactly as you say. There is no automatic fetching of related feeds. Yeah, that actually is pretty much relates to the discussion we had before, right? So if there would be some more standards around related feeds, that could be then implemented in the daemon as well. I think we're running out of time now. Our 1 hour slot is basically over. So if there's last questions or comments, feel free to use the chat or just open up your microphone. And I want to thank everyone who participated in the discussion, and Nina for organizing. Let's keep talking about this. I think the ComComs could also be a place for that. And we have the different repos, and we'll find a place in between where we sketch these things out. I think the consortium could like talk about where this should happen.